to the Otherworldly show from the Changing Times, Changing Worlds conference. And I am Tripicon, your host. And tonight, rather than a guest, we're going to be having a little chat around the supper table or whatever. If you have a cup of tea, with my cup of tea, I'm all ready to go. And we will all chat and talk about something that I think we probably have talked about privately with friends.
Oh yeah,
because this is just a
oh good, I still have some tea.
yes. Because this is just a conversation that often comes up. And where do you get things, and what have you done? And one of the things that I'm especially interested in is the concept of what have you stolen from fiction? Because I know I have. The pop culture that you're soaking in it. Is what we have to deal with. And I was thinking back on it, and not this week, but a previous time, I looked through the history of TV shows, and I can't find one season on TV that hasn't got some magic shows in it. Now, admittedly, there's some other speculative fiction in. I remember with great fondness from my childhood, The Time Tunnel and Quantum Leap and many of the other things that give us philosophical questions that allow us to explore things. What was it? There's a show where somebody was, I don't think it's 10 years ago, where a girl died because she was hit with a falling toilet seat. And
oh yes, Dead Like Me.
Dead Like Me. Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
Wonderful show. Wonderful
show. And that's the thing. I did a recorded courses. They have you can get courses out of the library, and one was on speculative fiction and how, whereas in a standard fiction, you can only explore when somebody dies, how do the people who are behind feel about it? With speculative fiction, you can then examine how the process is for the person who's experiencing it, and other things like that. As often as we have to deal with ghosts, and basically there are enough ghost reporting that it takes a great deal of convoluted thinking before anybody can deny their existence, and yet people still do because it's important to them.
It's amazing the leaps of logic I've seen.
Oh yeah. Lordy, yes. And but we do that because when you have foundational beliefs that are laid down, in order to change those beliefs, you have to pull the foundational beliefs out from underneath. And those ones that you don't even know you have are almost impossible to change. So that's why it's interesting to go back and look and see where did these ideas come from? And for me, when you're thinking books, because I am steeped in books, I read, this is my thing. This is how I spend my time. Books, I started with fairy tale books. And then you worked your way up, and I got to the teen years and discovered that there was such a thing as Wicca. And even before that, Hans Holzer was writing about the new pagans, and the 60s were called the occult explosion. And there was a lot of stuff out there. And so you could buy grimoires in strange little shops that sold incense and stuff. And you could, and then they moved up and they said, well, there weren't any books until the 80s. Like, well, yeah, in the 80s, Yes.
I seem to remember a store entirely packed full of them.
Uh-huh.
in New
As
York
do
City.
I.
Mhm.
But
You
you,
know,
you want to complete that rant?
Several of them. Several of them.
I know
Yeah,
I've
worked
seen
in the
I've seen
basement.
spell books that go back to the 30s, the 40s, the
Yeah.
aughts,
Yeah.
the previous aughts, you know.
If they in the late 60s, early 70s had, and I remember I subscribed to 5 or 6 different magazines.
Mhm.
One of my favorite was the what was it? It was written in a very new Art Nouveau script, and so it looked like and it was like neo-romantic paganism, but everybody thought I was subscribing to necromantic paganism. And no, no, it's not necromantic, it's neo-romantic, guys. Learn
Mhm.
how to read.
Yeah.
But we, yeah, the older ones of, yes, maybe the people who found paganism, neo-paganism in the 80s said they couldn't find any books because they couldn't find Cunningham, and they couldn't find Adler, and they couldn't find Starhawk, and they couldn't find the ones that are writing about us. You'd think they could have found
Every
Martello.
Walden books had them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Back when there was a Walden books, that is.
Yeah,
Or-
and there were you could find them in the right bookstores, but a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't find them. So I am thinking that maybe they're talking about the people who lived in, I was going to say Poughkeepsie or Akron, Ohio, or places where it wasn't.
Cucamonga.
Let's face it, you were in New York City. I was within the subway's reach of Boston.
Yeah.
So that probably made it a little easier for us.
And Cucamonga is literally a 45-minute bus trip to downtown LA.
But they say, no, there weren't any books. Yes, there were. Yes, I wouldn't have spent as much as I did if I wouldn't have had
Yeah.
full shelves if there were no books.
Of
But
course, it also helped that books were a lot cheaper back then. I've got a couple of
Oh yeah.
paperback Grimmers that I bought for like 75 cents.
yeah,
Mhm.
and,
Cover price.
But, that was
yeah, and of
more
course,
than about 50 years ago.
as the early Goths said, you couldn't go out and go to Target to oh God, what is the store? It's
Hot
basically the name.
Topic.
Hot Topics.
Yeah.
You could,
There wasn't a Hot
we had
Topic.
to rip the holes in our fishnets with our own teeth.
I don't think Spencer Gifts even had tarot cards yet.
So
No.
one of the things about younger folk that say, well, that didn't exist before the 80s. It isn't just with books about Wicca and witchcraft. It happens with, they say cosplay. Well, it was costuming back then. And it goes all the way back to the 30s, but they don't know anything about it
It goes before
until the 80s or the 90s. It's almost like they don't look at anything before they were born.
that. Mm-hmm. Some of the houses, high fashion in the 1880s and such were making fantastic costumes for people to wear masquerade balls. Call
People
that
have been
what you will.
making
Yes, that was a
costumes
more
since the
general
dawn of
masquerade. I was
time.
talking more about the science fiction and fantasy fandom, which is
Oh,
one of the
well,
ways I
There's
came
that,
in.
yes, but
Yes.
I consider it all cosplay at some level.
Yeah. Or early SCA when you had to make your own garb. It's like
And your own
Still
armor.
do.
and I suppose the older people among us remember when, if you had a book of shadows, it was hand copied from the hand copied version that your high priestess had.
Mm-hmm.
And
Is that an O or an A?
there was one book which I
if
would
you were lucky enough to run in those circles. I did not grow up near a big city. And furthermore, I grew up in the 80s, so I am a little bit younger.
Yeah.
But I grew up in a Christian cult.
Mm.
So, which
New Hampshire sheltering.
I escaped from when I was 12,
Yeah.
which is when I myself started my own path and
Find
found things
my copy.
on my own.
hmm
I'm 46
There
right
it is.
now. But yeah, it really depends on where you grew up and who was
Mhm.
around you and how lucky you were really to have, you know, who around you had around you.
I didn't have children my age around. I was going to a private school that my parents chose to send me to. So it wasn't that kind of place, you know? And I didn't have any friends from there that I hung out with, but I grew up on the Syracuse University campus, a couple blocks away from all the stores on the main street that was the SU shopping area. And there were bookstores there, and there were head shops, and there were all kinds of, you know,
Mhm.
places with all the Indian clothes with the mirrors on them and everything. And so I got exposed to that kind of thing at home, and I had free access to a library. My parents didn't care what books I took out.
I've got one here. I showed it last week. It's the 6th and 7th book of Moses,
Mm.
which is really good if you happen to be a Christian witch. But-
I personally am not. I get triggered very badly by anything Christian themed because of the abuse I went through in the cult.
This
Mm.
is actually more like Jewish mysticism because it's the Kabbalah and Talmud. But I'm looking at the, let's see, first American edition published in New York in 1880.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just the patriarchy that is involved in all of Christianity, and Judaism is a Christian-based religion that is
Other
triggering
way
for
around.
me.
Actually, other way around. Christianity grew out of Judaism.
Yes, it did, but it still is a Christian religion.
I think a lot of people like to use the term Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, that
Because
would
they do
probably be
link
a-
together
Yeah,
that
and some
strongly.
people even object to that, but I would call them one of the three people of the book.
Let us be
Because-
reminded that, excuse me, let us be reminded that in the early days with the pioneers in the 70s, when the craft had its surges, the church was irrelevant. Let's be reminded of that.
Mm.
Plus,
Yeah.
I
And-
somewhere down in the library, I've got Budge's book on Egyptian magic, which he published at the beginning of this century, or the previous century, because he was an Egyptologist who was doing a lot of translating of papyruses.
Mm.
I liked Robert Graves' White Goddess, and I liked the Golden Bough, and there was, and you could find Aradia, Leyland, and
Yeah.
there were a lot of things that you could look at as well as Gardner, but
Mhm.
Yeah.
it was as Holzer's book, The New Pagans, talked about, there were people who developed their own variety of paganism. You can see this if you read Wind in the Willows.
Oh
That
yeah,
freaking pagan,
Oh,
and lots of other ones that
The-
I'm caught.
I'm thinking specifically one
Catherine
chapter where they
Kurtz and
encountered
her
Pan.
rewriting of the Mabinogion is one of the things that drew me in. The
Yep,
Children of Lear, you know,
Mhm.
I love that.
Mhm.
And
I love those
all
books.
for 95 cents.
Yep.
But
Alan Gardner. Yeah.
I think I will
Fiction.
plunge in here, take a little sidestep to mention when I had mentioned earlier that, have you tried things from fiction? I know that I use science fiction as an inspiration. I was probably 13 when I first tried biofeedback, having read about it in a science fiction book. Didn't feel prepared for school, so I raised my temperature mentally, and it worked. And when I was starting to do magic with runes, I stole the idea from the Camber of Chaldee series of using a medallion, a piece of jewelry, as a focal point and charging it, and using that two linked pieces to communicate when I was out at a conference and the kids were at home. And I just, blatantly stealing. I know many people who read the Camber books tried to figure out how to make wards like the ones that they had, but no one's quite figured that out. I don't think we have the physics of whatever those little blocks were made out of.
I've got stuff that will do that, but it does require rare earth magnets.
Yeah, so, but I'm just saying that there are a lot of things I look at. When I was reading the Harry Dresden series, which what Starwolf and his wife turned me on to, I looked at some of the earlier magic he was doing, and I was saying, this, I can see how that would work, because he would do spells that had included things like cigarette butts and
Very much an in the world type mage.
Yeah,
I must admit, my first encounter with the concept of astral projection, I lifted straight from a Lynn Carter novel, only to find out later, yeah, that's exactly how you do it. He must have done his research.
And sometimes you wonder if they did their research or whether it was as Raven Caldera says, batch download into the head of the person who's experiencing it. I don't have a lot of psychic experiences, but occasionally I have had one. And one of those times is when I was a nanny and I had a baby with a bottom that was so diaper rashed that it was bleeding. It was blood flowing down from open wounds in the butt. And I thought I heard somebody in the room with me, and there was nobody but me and the baby saying, honey. And I looked around and there was nobody there. And I checked out the door to see if there was anybody. No, there was nobody there. So I figured, okay, could it hurt? And I couldn't think of a way it would hurt, but being of a scientific turn of mind, I put honey on one butt cheek and put him to bed. And in the morning, that butt cheek was all healed up and the other was still bleeding. And so we put it on, and then that is, I think, a straight psychic. Was it some lovely entity that wanted to help the baby? Was it something that was trying to help me? One thing is for sure, I know that honey is very great on wounds, and I found out later that nurses used to sneak it into hospitals to put on bed sores, because that's about the only thing they know.
I have a question about that.
Oh yeah, sure.
Do you think that was maybe something like internal, like some sort of like ancestral knowledge, or like a just like deep animalistic knowledge, or like some sort of external entity, maybe like a spirit guide that helped that day?
I think it was something external. Whether it was a spirit guide, I don't know. But I think that when you hear it and the perception is that it sounds like it's coming through your ears, then it is external. This is the kind of conversation I think we need to have.
I ask this because I've experienced the same type of thing a few times. Yes. And I didn't know, like, I didn't know if it was just like, because I myself am psychic, or maybe, somebody's whispering in my, like, maybe somebody's spirit's trying to help me, or I don't know.
I tend, if you start where I'm starting from, I do believe that I have the higher self, and I may have spirit guides. I start with the premise that the world is full of entities who are invisible and who interact with us anyway. I believe there are ghosts, and that there are ancestors, and that there are the good people, and there are all kinds of beings out there. And I am a lot less concerned with putting names on them. If you go back into when I was in my 20s and 30s, I wanted to put names on them. I wanted to define them. I wanted to understand them. Now it's just, okay, is it good information or bad? And how do I how do I know whether this is a trustworthy voice or one that I should avoid?
Mhm.
That seems important to me.
Yeah,
well-
nothing that pronounced, like we're actually heard and saw things at the same time that was telling me
Mhm.
about something. Usually it was a warning and then the thing would happen.
Mm.
Nothing that drastic has happened in, I don't know, maybe 20 years. But it definitely stuck with me.
Well, yeah,
Right.
when it seems external and then it comes true and then it works. I mean, let's face it, diaper rash isn't that as important as some warnings are. But
it's actually, if you think about it, it's tangible proof, though.
yeah, it was
Mhm.
definitely
Yeah.
tangible proof. And no, I don't have these things very often. And how often does one need a dire warning? So
Hopefully, rarely.
it should be rarely, in my opinion. I hope
You'd
it's real.
hope.
You know.
Yeah, but you should listen to them, because if you didn't, your life would go forwards like, shoot, I should have listened to that, and what would have happened if I hadn't?
Right.
That's an important thing, and to me, the important thing is does it, and how do you make it useful to you? To me, the only reason I use Magick is because it works. My sister, the artist, had switched from a kick wheel to a electric ceramic
Pottery wheel.
potter's wheel. And so she offered me her kick wheel. I don't know if you know them, but they are at the very bottom there. You have a large round rock that you push with your wheel, and then it is attached to the wheel that the clay goes on. They're like 300 to 400 pounds.
Mm.
So I happily said, oh, well, I've got a big, strong van. I can do that. And I went down there and we dragged this sucker across her yard from the basement she stored it in and got it to the parking lot where my van was. And I was like, how are we going to pick that up? Because we had the back of the van is a good 3 feet off the ground. And I said, well, hold on a second. And I put a large pulley and lever thing, attached it to it in my mind with a very long one, because I figured the longer it is, the more the mechanical advantage you're going to have. And when we said 1, 2, 3 lift, I pulled on the magical rope and we just picked the sucker up and put it in the back as if it weighed 50 pounds. And everybody else was like, how did you do that? And I said, I just used Magick. We needed it. And so I used Magick. And they're like, how? And it's like, well, I faked it, which is the way a whole lot of us have been doing this for the last 60 years. And
You pattern what you
Probably.
want to happen.
Yeah.
You pattern what you want to happen. You make a model of it in your head or in space or in the
Yeah.
air.
I used the logic of physics that I knew and attached it to the real world through my mind.
Mhm.
It worked. And we did it again when I took it out of the back of the car, and the car didn't die on the way, which is good.
Always a useful thing.
But I kind of wonder if it had been later in my life, if I might have used the term, the Wingardium Leviosa,
Why not?
But I know that when I was reading the Dresden books, it was very easy for me to think, Forzair, or what was his thing he said for fireball, but Fuego, but which he says in the book, it was simply because he was busy failing Spanish lessons at the time. and I think that's the way. I think that's the way a lot of I think our modern assumption that spells need to be done in Latin is based on the fact that during a lot of the European Middle Ages, Latin was the language of power.
Right.
Well, there's something else I I lifted from an from a Poul Anderson novel, oddly enough, using Pig Latin.
Mm,
Pig Latin for
Yeah.
magic? I love
Yeah.
it.
It takes me a while to formulate it because it's adding the istes and ismes and
Mm.
to the end of things to make it sound right.
mhm.
But give me time. I can do a pretty effective one in, like I said, in Pig Latin.
Right.
Especially
Yeah.
then I do stupid things like write it out in runic.
I
Church
like,
of All World. Church of All Worlds is basically based on Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah.
Mm,
You know, may you never hunger, may you never thirst, which has
Mhm.
gone all
It-
over everywhere.
I hear it
is-
in pretty much every Wiccan circle in the area uses that.
mhm.
Yep.
And I'm sure somewhere's in the other
That
world,
sounds like a
Robert Heinlein
Jewish
is
saying.
laughing his head off.
Well, it's like the golden rule can be found in every
Yeah.
possible culture and religion you can imagine too.
That's true.
Well,
But
one
in-
of the things about Stranger in a Strange Land
Yes.
is Heinlein knew, oh God, Scientology.
yeah.
Mhm.
He knew
Brains.
Hubbard. Yeah.
He knew
remember-
Hubbard.
Yeah.
And he actually attended some meetings over at Jack Parsons' place
Oh,
out
Yeah.
in Pasadena. Okay, so there is some connection to fairly heavy duty magic.
yeah.
Mhm.
I know
there.
Parsons was connected to Crowley. So for that
Oh,
matter
yeah.
was Hubbard.
Yes,
They had a little
Yes.
dust up as to who was going to be Crowley's American heir,
Mhm.
which may have led
But-
to a certain explosion.
but
Hey.
in science fiction circles,
Ooh,
there's a story, and I've actually heard it from somebody that said they actually were in the room at the
Mm.
convention where Hubbard decided that you could make a whole lot more money inventing a religion.
Mhm.
Yep.
And
And proved that he could.
yes, but who did? You know, because Heinlein actually challenged him to do that. If you take a look at how Stranger in a Strange Land has gone, it wasn't Heinlein exactly, it's his basis of things,
Mhm.
you know, that Timsel, that Oberon picked up on and
Mhm.
put out into the world. But I bet you anything that what Oberon came up with will outlive Scientology by
Yeah.
a long shot.
More than likely,
Yeah.
it's considerably healthier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
You don't find any.
And
What I was about to say is you don't
the
find
only
any.
the only yeah, go ahead.
Which one of us? I
Well,
was
I'll
about to say you
finish.
don't find any
I'll-
ex-Church of All Worlds members, screaming about mind control.
Well,
No.
yeah, but he was quite obvious about he wanted to do mind control.
Yeah.
He was going for that. That was his thing.
Mm.
I don't know a lot about the inner workings and the upper levels in Scientology, but I have heard they are a whole lot like stuff in the upper levels of the OTO
Mhm.
that he
That would
actually
make sense.
stole.
The
Yeah, a lot of this
Scientologists
stuff
I knew.
is Thelema with the serial number rubbed off.
Well, I think what happens is you get an organization, whether it is Christianity, who then adopted the bureaucracy of Rome, or whether you get, the OTO or other thing. If you don't like the bureaucracy, you can take the basic teachings and go with them. I knew Scientologists who did that, and they were charming people, but the ones who really got into it and followed the Scientology levels that went up into big money, they seem a little cracked to me, and I think they need a little help.
Yeah.
But I think that it probably, by extension, if I can see a pattern, works the same way with everything from Wicca to, I kind of like Judaism because it's so willing to accept multiple points of view. I think it may be why it's lasted so long. But,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
it's
I
so
just-
laid back.
No,
Don't get me
never-
wrong. I am ethnically Jewish. My mother and her parents fled from Germany to
No
Mhm.
get, they fled from,
genocide.
Nazi Germany,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm here. But Judaism, I mean, as far as, and I do call it a Christian religion. I'm sorry if I offend anybody.
That's okay.
I realize that Christianity came out of Judaism, but the scholars can, well, from what I've read, me personally, from what I have read, it is a Christian religion. And where was I going with this? Oh my God, ADHD. Judaism. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Recently I read some not just one, but a few scholarly articles that said all of the major religions we have today were started out as cults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All a religion
And-
is a very large cult. That has a tax
including
ID.
Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small
I totally
tribal
agree.
religion centered
Oh.
around one specific set of deities, and
More people came to it, and people
Mhm.
started saying, "Hey,
Cult
you're so
means I
different
don't
from us. You
like
should move
them,
somewhere else."
period.
Yeah, you should move somewhere else. They said. So,
I'm not sure that applies, and these probably aren't looked at like large mainstream religions here in the West, but I don't think that applies to Shinto. And I don't
No,
think that
that's
applies
true.
to some, to Taoism
No,
and
Yeah.
and some of the other Eastern religions that
Buddhism. No.
go
Yeah.
get closer to animism and shamanism.
fair
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the indigenous ones are more close to their practice is simply a way of understanding the world, and it
Yeah.
works. And I'm afraid, I think the level of bureaucracy that the Christian church borrowed from Rome and moved in and worked in with politics has been its downfall in many ways. But if you look
Yeah.
at Christianity itself, it split up into dozens of little cults, although they prefer to call them, what do they call them?
sects.
Crap.
Sects.
Denominations.
Denominations, yes. But
That too,
it's
yeah.
it's still simply, do you believe in predestination? I don't know. These different things make some people more comfortable. But I've got friends who are looking at from church to church to church. They're trying to find C.S. Lewis pagan Christians.
Good luck.
They want to have the type of Christianity that C.S. Lewis talked about. It's like, well, good luck, and I hope you find them, because great
Right.
people.
Though
But-
that would be a relatively easy Christianity to get along with.
Yeah. And so it's if people just treated each other nicely
Mm-hmm.
and let them look, it would be great. But let's talk a little bit more about Magick, because that's what I wanted to talk about, and how pop
Right.
culture has changed. What we bring into it, I think, is a lot of what we learned from Disney, from
Mhm.
our books, from our comic books, when we were way little and have forgotten that we learned it.
For me, it started with fairy tale books and The Wizard of Oz. And I realized watching The Wizard of Oz early on and getting to watch the shows like the Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella and the Mary Martin Peter Pan and
Mhm.
all of that. These were where I started forming my sense of magic and the concept that there were rules to magic. I realized
Mhm.
that, okay, so you have Sleeping Beauty. And Maleficent, or whatever she's called in the original fairy tale, just the evil fairy or sometimes or something like that. But just a fairy who was ticked off.
Yeah, she didn't get invited, so she
Right, she
showed
didn't
up.
get invited, so she puts a curse on the baby. But she's going to die when she turns a certain age, and pricks her finger on a spindle. And the next fairy comes along and says, well, I can't undo what she did, but I can soften it. No, she's not going to die. She's going to fall asleep. And so will all those in the castle, so that when she wakes up eventually to the true love's kiss, there will be people with her to take care of her and all that. A witch can, the magic user could not undo what another magic user had done. You get to the Wizard of Oz, and oh, what was the example I was thinking of in there? The poppies.
Earlier today, you talked about Glinda and the Wicked Witch of the West.
Well, yeah, Glinda and the Wicked Witch of the West. Early today, the poppy field that the Wicked Witch of the West put in place with the intention that it poisoned them and put them to an eternal sleep. They made it softer in the movie. But then Glinda causes them, in the book, she causes, that we have the mice are caused to help them out of the field. But Glinda couldn't undo the poppies. She could drop snow on them all and wake them up. So they got out on their own. A witch couldn't undo what another had done. Glinda put the Witch of the East's shoes on Dorothy's feet. The Wicked Witch of the West could not take them off.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be given to her. And then moving into Bewitched, all the shenanigans, or most of them anyway, happen because Darren ticks off Endora. Endora casts a spell on Darren. And Samantha can't undo what her mother did because it's another witch's spell. So I start to see consistency of rules among fictional fantasy worlds in Magic.
And that you also see that in Bell Book and Candle.
Mm-hmm.
Which I still haven't seen. I intend to, though.
Oh, you
It's a
should.
wonderful-
It's
it's
a wonderful movie.
Yes.
But
So I don't know that I wanted to do any of the spells that I saw in fiction, in books, and in movies. I was reading, by the time the 60s were over, I was reading, the real life books about psychic powers and all that. And I was aiming more for that sort of thing. So I would make up my own cards with the wave and the triangle and the star. And, But I definitely learned that even among different fictional worlds, there was frequently a continuous concept, a compatible concept of what the rules of magic were or should be. And there was good magic and there was evil magic, and it wasn't a matter of the magic itself, it was how you used it.
So modern people will be looking at, for instance, it may not be all magic, but it'll be, Disney's definitions of what a genie can't do. Is I can't bring anybody back from the dead. I can't make somebody fall in love, and no more wishing for more witches.
And I Dream of Jeannie taught me that genie magic is totally different than witch magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Two different species.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of different species, I am getting so cross, whether it's Bell Book and Candle or Bewitched or Harry Potter,
Right.
with the idea that humans or mortals and witches are a different breed. It's like, no, humans are psychic. Some of them have more talents than others.
At least
Some
Harry
of them
Potter,
have learned how to do it better.
At least Harry Potter admits that it's a controversial thing. There are the purebloods, and then there's the Muggles, but there are people who now acknowledge it. Muggles are often born with the ability too. So
yeah, but that's
Hermione.
the thing occurs in fiction a lot, and I
Yeah.
really I have tried to understand it, and I think the reason that they came up with it is it allows them to distance themselves from magic
Mhm.
safely.
The
Yeah.
witch becomes more other than they were before.
Yeah, I mean, it is disappointing that we're not the quasi-immortal, superpowered jet setters that they are portrayed in, like, Bewitched.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Has
Basically-
anybody ever read The Hounds of the Morrigan by Pat O'Shea?
No.
No.
No, but that
not.
sounds interesting.
So the
Yeah.
more
It was a great book. I read it in the 80s. It was the first big novel I ever read. And it's based on it's a fantasy fairy tale like we're talking about here, but it has magic in it, and the interesting thing is that many of the characters in the story are actually based on old Celtic gods and goddesses.
Mm.
They're major players in the book.
Nice.
Kind of cool.
Yeah.
The leading characters are Pidge and Brige, or Bridget, however you want to pronounce it. Brother and sister, and they have to kind of save the day. It's
Mhm.
really
hoot.
Sounds like a Charles DeLint type
I
novel.
just checked Amazon, and they have the first 4 things I've seen on it, not available, not available, not available. It's like, okay, so this is going to make it very hard for us to find.
You'll find it in paperback. It's hard to find in hardcover.
Oh yeah, here's the hardcover for $295.
Right.
Okay,
like
there,
95
there,
cents
there's
for
one. Okay.
Amazon.
I was seeing that you see, they're often very big on borrowing from the and I just put a link in the chat.
Mm.
I liked the references that you saw in the Oversea Under Stone, Susan Cooper's.
Susan Cooper.
Oh my God.
I've reread that series over and
Oh,
over
yeah.
again.
Until-
So much of
Until my book fell apart, and then I had to get a new one.
That's one of my favorites too.
What is that? I want to write that down.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
It's Oversea Under Stone.
There are
It's
5 books.
there are wonderful.
it's the Dark is Rising sequence,
Yes.
Okay, Dark is
Which-
Rising.
which
They
is the
made it-
second book.
They made a horrible movie out of it.
Okay.
Don't bother with that. Read
I
the
bought it
book.
Thank you.
automatically and have not watched it twice because it is so bad.
Mm.
I've
and
actually
I-
watched it. But-
Don't.
yeah.
It's a
Thank
disappointment.
you.
It's a deep, complex series that makes you think, where the good and the bad are developed properly, so that there is no evil guy. It's not a fairy tale. It's a people doing magic thing.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Well, you can get a complete box set of the paperbacks for $40.
yeah.
Dark
And
Est.
but it starts with your very basic concept of a couple of English children who have to save the
There.
world with magic.
The box set is on the link I just put, and you could find the individual books otherwise.
Yeah, you probably can find them
Yeah.
much cheaper, but it's got some good stuff in it. I know. I don't know about the rest of you, but I personally thought the 80s was my happy place because they had the golden age of fantasy movies, Willow and Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and Princess Bride, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
please come back and keep doing it.
Have you seen the new series of Willow?
No, I
I've seen
haven't.
some
Yeah.
episodes.
I keep meaning to.
I've
It's
seen some of
good.
it.
I also haven't seen Loki. And I have to
Oh, my
admit,
goodness.
I was enchanted by the Thor comics when I was a kid, but they always made me annoyed.
The Loki series is very different.
So,
Yes,
I like
that's
it
a
a
good
lot.
word for it.
but we have magic. I'm going to recommend, just for the fun of it, the Myth Inc. series
Oh,
from
yeah.
Robert Asprin.
Yes.
I
They have
really,
some excellent basic lessons in magic in those books.
yes, Myth Inc. as an incorporated series by Robert Asprin. I especially like his how to tap into the energy web of the
Of the earth.
earth, and that was the first thing that magicians taught their apprentices.
74.49 for Misadventures Volume 2 in paperback.
So
But it
has
was
anyone here read all of the Wheel of Time?
Yeah.
I love
Has
the
anyone
Wheel
read all of the
I've
Wheel of
touched
Time?
one of them. I've never touched
And
any of them.
I've taken a lot of stuff from the Wheel of Time. The
Is
way
there-
things are thought about.
Is there any good magic in was it something of swords? Sword of Thrones. That it?
Game of Thrones.
Game of
Game
Thrones.
of Thrones.
Yeah. Which I have never seen. And so,
Welcome to the club.
I couldn't get past the 4th episode
It's super
of the
violent.
first season.
I've watched the entire
It's super
thing.
violent. There may be.
There
My
is-
husband's read the books. I have not.
There
Yeah.
is some
And I
interesting
won't,
magic,
because
but you
it's-
may have to read the books to understand more of the theory behind it.
but the
Yeah.
Camber, the Catherine Kurtz's Camber series,
Oh,
Yeah.
it's
Lammas Night.
it made, oh, I loved Lammas Night. The concept of the divine sacrifice. I actually believed for 20 years or so the whole Margaret Murray assumption about the divine king and the divine sacrifice. And then I found
Yeah.
out how much she had misinterpreted.
The whole witch cult in Western Europe thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
There is you have to be ready to say, okay, I think that Leyland's housekeeper was feeding him a load of bull so that she could keep getting paid. Or
Could very well
maybe she was
Maybe not.
giving him some mixture of real and not real so that she wouldn't get in trouble with the other Strega she was hanging with.
Mhm.
It's always hard to tell. But then again, you get to fiction and people can do what they want and they can make it make sense. At
Okay.
least in their world, you can
Mhm.
have the metaphysics all work. We don't have that possibility in this world. I think it's wonderful when a series explains that the voodoo people use a different kind of magic than the high magicians use, and it all works differently, and you don't expect them to work the same way. It's like we're all working in the same world, but it doesn't work the same way. Yes, gosh, that is such an important concept.
And
But-
trying
Yeah.
to explain to people that magic using dolls is way more European than it is West African.
Yeah.
You know, the whole sticking pins in dolls is straight out of, Celtic and British traditional and Italian Strega,
Mhm.
and somehow it got blended into what Hollywood considers voodoo.
Right.
Did anybody see I think it may have been a made for TV movie, Cast a Deadly Spell.
Yes, actually,
Oh.
we own a copy of that.
So do I, but I only own a copy on VHS.
No, we've got it on DVD.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look
Mhm.
because it was great. It was fairly firmly tongue in cheek, so deeply into the cheek it's kind of coming out his ear. But
Yeah.
Mhm.
but it had the hero who, in a world where everybody used magic, the private detective named Lovecraft would not use magic.
Mm.
And and it was set like in the 40s. It
Yeah.
was beautiful.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
in that just post World War II cinema noir era. So
But oh, how about the Crustomancy books? Anybody?
I think
no.
Kathy's read those.
Yeah, those are another, children's books are a wonderful source, and they allow the kids to explore what makes something good or bad, what is evil and what is not evil. Christomancy discovered he had natural psychic abilities, and the adults, when he was a kid, and the adults around him exploited his abilities to do their evil stuff, and he discovered that he participated in some pretty horrible things.
Mhm.
And that
Now
was
look-
that was sad.
Yeah. Now I'm bringing up the Diane Duane and the Young Wizards books, and her books for adults that are called Feline Wizards books. They're all in the same wizard universe. And for me, it is the series where the magic feels most right for me.
Well, you're an animal magic.
Not that. Even before I got to the cat books.
Hmm.
But it turns out that there are wizards in nearly every living species that has intelligence, apparently. So, but I started with So You Want to Be a Wizard, which is the first one. They start out as books for young, tweens, even. And they advance on through to more complex ideas. And it's almost like engineering, the way they describe how the wizardry works. It's also like art. They talk about being able to see these golden strands that connect the worlds, and these and being able to create these images with codes and runes built into them, and symbols, and have them do the magic that you want them to do.
This sounds familiar. What is this called?
Young Wizards. The first book is called So You Want to Be a Wizard.
Hmm.
And there are many, many other titles.
How about The Flying Sorcerers
I don't know that one.
Neither do
by
I.
Niven and Gerald? Supposedly set on another planet where an astronaut, a stranded astronaut, has to deal with the magicians among the native peoples. And it's supposed to be making fun of it. Of course, there's really no such thing as magic, but it gives tips on spell construction. There's the magician explains how superstition works the way it does. So there are no spells for deconsecrating house trees. All right, I'll make one.
Well, you get the same type of thing in the Dragon Knight series, where a guy from the modern world finds himself in a medieval fantasy world, trying to understand how the magic works, and has to do it from his own point of view, which allows him to bypass a lot of things.
Or for that matter, Incomplete Enchanter and its extensions, which actually drove me to take one semester of logic in college, so I could understand how to construct a syllogism.
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
Right up there with my genie game. But
yeah.
Do any of you have young granddaughters?
No.
I have no children.
No,
Not that I
never
know
mind
of.
then.
No, don't you don't require.
Like, why do you ask?
Yeah.
Because
Disney
I
series.
ask because when my daughter was a small child, I wanted to read to her from not typical fairy tale books where the prince was always rescuing the princess, right? So I had to find fairy tale books where there were female heroines. And I found sets of books where every story, and most of them were folk stories, which was really cool. They're from all around the world, where the heroine of each story was female. That's why I asked. I have a few of them. They're really good.
There's also Esther Friesner's Chicks in Chainmail series.
Yeah, which is fun.
Yes, which covers so many things.
Now I'm going to turn over to Amazon for a moment here and point out an Amazon original series called Just Add Magic. It's about 3 girls who are friends, and one of them has a grandmother, and the girl finds her grandmother's old cookbook, and they start using it. Turns out the recipes are magic spells, and everyone has a catch to it in some way. And a result you don't expect, a side effect. It's called Just Add Magic.
Did the oven by any chance have a funny dial on it that you turned for? One
No.
was for mundane, because there was one like I remember it sounded like that, and there were settings for if you turn it this way, the cookies bake out normal, but if you turn them the other way, they come out.
No, that's got to be a different series.
Yeah,
And
well,
apparently it's a series of books that they based it on.
There was,
And then there
only
was
one
Just
book.
Add Magic Mystery City was a follow-up series. They're really fascinating, and I really love that magic system too, where and it turns out there's a lot of people who know about it and a lot of people who don't. There's some really interesting consequences for the entire town they live in sometimes.
There are, I think that the juvenile fiction
Oh, yeah.
is highly I went to a conference on popular magic and the pop culture and magic,
Mhm.
and by Helen Berger, who has done a lot of writing on neo-paganism, and they had papers. They had people from Australia and Israel and Scandinavia, and they talked about all magic, craft, death metal music, and Harry Potter, and all kinds of things. But nobody had talked about the effect of the little 350 these days, it would have been 75 cents in our day, juvenile fiction. There wasn't, when my kids were in school, Scholastic sent home a little
That's right.
bifold catalog that you could get discount books because they were encouraging kids to read. And there was never a month that went by that didn't have some kind of occult offering in it.
Mhm.
I particularly liked The Girl with the Silver Eyes, but they had, I just wish that I had submitted a paper to it so that I could have given them, it's like, no, you can't ignore what happens. The formative years, that which teaches you how this stuff works, is going to be more powerful in the long run than any copy of How Witchcraft Works or Lady Sheba's Book of Shadows or Cunningham that you get when you're in your 20s. This is
Yeah, I'm afraid I bought my first copy of Lady Sheba when I was in my teens.
but yeah, well, she was the first one to come out. There was a paperback I got when I was still in high school or college, I forget which, and you were supposed to write your Book of Shadows in all pictographs, and she had a series of pictographs, and I lost that paperback. I probably lost it in the fire. I wish I could get one. I did a presentation in high school.
Oh, we seem to have lost her.
Oh, darn. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
In some of the school, in our town library, I had books. I was able to find books that showed me medieval spells, like the one I gave the kids when I did a presentation on witchcraft, for how to give people warts. And I had, but they were authentic medieval spells
Mhm.
that were in books about magic. They were simple history books that,
Yeah.
and
There were a couple of those in the library where I lived.
I can't find it anymore. It's not in the library anymore. And I
Mm.
have no idea what it was because I didn't keep that good notes. But I would love to have go back and figured out. I know there was one book on gypsy spells that included sing this song while washing the person's hair in vinegar solution with herbs in it, and that will take care of a headache. And I said, well, yeah, if you use a lukewarm, wash somebody's, massage their hair and wash it, yeah, I would probably take care of a headache. But that was me trying to explain it. But spells, they're available. But I think we get more from our fairy tales.
Yeah.
About the structure of how magic works. I think we get more of it from our science fiction, fairy tales, fantasy, whatever. I think we pick more of that up. I think it speaks to us on a much deeper level.
Oh yeah.
Than a simple grimoire will.
I think some of that is actually inspiration.
Mhm.
I've heard there's someone that talks about the hidden kingdoms, like those spirits that want to influence this world will channel things to writers, artists, and so on, who will then put them out consciously or unconsciously into the world. I have several writer friends, and also went to a really interesting panel at a convention back in the early 80s, where I heard Bernie Wrightson, who was a comic book artist that drew really macabre stuff, and Stephen King talk about how what King said, what he wrote, it would come into his mind, and Bernie agreed with him. He said it's exactly how his images came. They'd come into his mind, and if they didn't get them out on paper, they'd drive him crazy. You know? And so for me, that's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this stuff actually does come to us through
It's
spirit.
probably where they get the concept of a muse.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's Tim Powers, and The Stress of Her Regard is a great book on that.
Stress of Her Regard. I'm getting a very long list of
Things to read.
yes. But I do think that we do get, and does anybody else have something? Because as Starwolf has run off to eat,
Right.
clearly the time has come. I don't want to miss the opportunity to get anything from somebody if you're bringing something. I know I talk too much. I get excited, you know.
Trying to remember if there's anything else that the Diane Duane stuff really impressed itself on me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Just Add Magic. The cooking as
I've read
magic.
read the Young Wizard series, I think. But the feline
There are a lot of side stories she's added in the meantime. You can't get everything on Amazon. If you find her homepage, her website, there are things you can buy directly from her. And that helps her out a little more.
Well, then I think because we have passed the hour, I'm going to finish this up. This is, of course, the kind of thing that we talk about. This is what I call hall conversations at the conference. Next week, I got a guest who is Gayla Soldano, who is talking about how to pick up the magic around you, how to notice magic, which should be fun.
Oh, cool.
And Arkenstone is going to be coming in February, talking about how tribalism can be positive, because we all talk about tribalism as something that's slightly dangerous these days. It's like the term cult has become negative, and
Yeah.
it was originally simply, oh, that's the cult of this god, that's the cult of that god. That's in paganism. Having different cults just made sense, but
Yeah.
In Christianity, if it's not us, it's bad. It's become a sad thing. Luckily, thank goodness, all Christians aren't like that. But yes, so this will be up in a couple of days, so you can tell your friends if they missed it and wanted to hear it. Unfortunately, we're going to miss their contribution, but. And see you and in upcoming weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah, this
doing
was
this.
fun.
It was nice
This
to
was a good
see you
one.
again.
Oh, it is
Good to
nice
see
to
you
see you
too.
again. And
And Will,